So today I want to go over my favorite essential sewing tools. I feel like these tools are not really popular in the sewing world. You don't really see them at fabric stores, and if you do, you see versions of them that are not as good. So these are my highly recommended, most used essential sewing tools. So to start off, let's talk about scissors, because everybody uses scissors when they're sewing. This brand is called Kai. These are Japanese scissors, and these are by far the best scissors that I've ever sewn with. They're just incredible. Similarly to like a Japanese knife, for example, the Japanese just do a really great job with working with steel, and these scissors are no exception. So these are high carbon stainless steel scissors, which makes them super, super lightweight. They're also ergonomically designed so that they're not heavy when you're cutting with them, and they just have like a really great balance, so the weight is evenly distributed between the handles and the blades. And they also just open and close really easily, which I feel like with other sewing scissors I use, especially those like metal Ginger scissors, those ones hurt my hand after using them for like 2 seconds because they're so hard to open and close, and also just like gripping the metal is just really not a pleasant experience. And these ones are just really comfortable to hold. They also cut like butter. You can just slice through fabric like you do with a pair of scissors and paper. Like, they're that amazing, and the first time I used these I wanted to cry because of how good they were. These are a little bit more expensive, and fabric scissors in general already kind of tend to run on the higher side, but I can assure you that these are worth every penny. Before I discovered these scissors, I had tried so many different other brands and wasted a lot of money on those, and with just like the purchase of one of these, you can save yourself a lot of headache and not have to go through 2 or 3 different brands before you discover these are the best ones. By the way, none of this is sponsored. I just really love these scissors and I want everybody to know about them. So next is sort of an assortment of tools that I use for marking things. So number 1 is these heat disappearing ink pens. These are really great for marking stuff because they have a very fine tip, just like a normal pen does. But if you go over them with the iron, the ink disappears. And that is really, really useful for marking stuff if you just need it marked for a little bit, and then once you iron it, it can go away. You could essentially mark all of your seams with this and then sew them and then take it to the ironing board, and it just disappears like magic. So these are really, really great for that. But if you want something that is a little bit more lasting, I really like this purple pen. This is a disappearing ink pen, but it disappears in, they say like 24 hours on the marketing, but I feel like it takes more like 2 or 3 days for it to disappear. But it's a great solution if you want something that will hold up to being ironed. And if you do need to take it off sooner than the 1 to 2 to 3 days, then you can just go over it with some water and then it goes away with that. This one I probably use more than anything because it's just really quick to just mark fabric with it. But these ones are great if you're trying to do something a little bit more precise. And similarly is this pen. This is, I think it's supposed to be used for marking embroidery. It's just a white chalk pen, but this is really great to use if you're trying to mark something on really dark or black fabric, because obviously these pens wouldn't really show up on a black fabric. So this is the one that I would use in that case. It is made of chalk, so it does rub off a little bit easier than these ones, so you just kind of have to be more careful and then maybe mark your lines a little bit stronger. And this one also breaks a lot easier because it's chalk, so I don't like it for that reason. But when you're trying to mark on black fabrics, you don't really have many options. But there is one other option that I like to use, and that is this chalk pen. So this is kind of the same, except for it has this little wheel inside where it dispenses the chalk from. And I like this one a lot because it is a lot faster and comes out a lot easier than this. This is kind of hard to get to mark on the fabric sometimes. but this one isn't as precise. So I would use this more if I'm trying to do like a bigger area or like mark around big patterns or do like notches or something that doesn't have to be super, super precise, but I want it done quickly. This is the one I would use. And this one is also really great because you can refill the chalk, so you don't have to buy a completely new pen every time it goes out. This is just chalk powder inside here, and then you unscrew this and then you fill it with chalk. And you can just buy like a little powder of chalk at the craft store or online. Next is this fun little tool. This is a buttonhole spacer. So this is really, really useful. I think you can already guess why. If you're trying to mark buttons, this just evenly spaces them for you. And it has like little markings on here, so you can mark them like 1/4 inch away, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch from like the edge of the fabric, depending on what you need. And the markings go all the way up into here as well. So this is just really great if you do a lot of buttons, because button spacing is pretty annoying. The only complaint I have about this is it's not like super even. It's kind of just a start in the right direction towards having even spacing. Like you can see that I can adjust it so that it's a lot closer here and then a lot wider here. So that does make it a little bit difficult, but if you just grab your ruler and then slowly try to adjust each one, this really helped point you in the right direction at least. Next is my pattern weights. These are actually just boat washers, I think is what they're called. A washer that you would put on a boat or something. My biggest complaint with pattern weights is that they're super expensive for like nothing. You're just trying to get something heavy to weigh down on your pattern piece or your fabric, and it's such a simple thing. It shouldn't have to be that complicated, but for some reason they're so expensive. So this is a little hack that I learned from my pattern making teacher a long time ago, and I just think that it's so brilliant because it's so simple. They have a little bit of heft to them. They're not quite as heavy as the traditional pattern weights that they do sell specifically for that purpose, but I think they get the job done fine. They're definitely heavy enough to hold down paper, and my only concern would be if I'm working with like a thicker fabric or something. They're not like super, super heavy, but if you just use more weights, then it holds it down better, or you know, you could use like the traditional pattern weights here and there, but these are great just because they're less expensive and you get a lot of them for the price. And they're also really small to store, so I feel like they could go in your sewing box really easily, and you don't have to carry around like a million giant, heavy, clunky pattern weights. Next is my pin tray. This is just a plate that I thrifted, and then I glued some magnets to the back. This is a DIY version, but you can also get a store-bought version like this. This is, I think it was marketed as like a safety pin tray, a magnetic safety pin tray when I bought it. Not specifically for pins, but it gets the job done just the same. And these are really great because when you're sewing, you just kind of throw the pin in the general direction of the tray and it catches it. And I really hate taking the time to stick pins in like a sewing tomato or a pin cushion when I'm sewing. It just takes too long, and then they don't go in fast enough, and then they kind of get all over my table because I just kind of get really focused about sewing, so I'm not thinking about individually putting each pin back. But these are really great because you're just sewing along and you just throw it in the general direction and it catches it. I don't really use those sewing pin cushion tomato things for anything except for holding my sewing needles, so this is by far a better solution for holding your pins. In regards to sewing pins, I also want to recommend this type of pin. This is a quilting pin, and I really like these ones because they're a little bit longer and they are a little bit more heavy duty at the top. I don't know how I have these ones mixed in here, but I hate these little white ones. they bend really easily and they're too short. So for a number of reasons, I despise these. I really, really despise those like multicolored metallic ones. And they're just really, really cheap. And I feel like they get dull faster and they're just not good. These are by far the best for the applications that I use them for, which is mostly thicker fabrics. But if you are working with like a silk fabric or something, you would probably get silk pins, or you would want to use something like this instead. But these ones are great for like general purpose sewing, the extra long quilting pins. Next is my razor blade. And this is what I use instead of a seam ripper. If you haven't seen my video about how I use this, then I recommend watching that. I go more into depth into how to use it, but this is by far the tool that I use more than anything and is always at my little side of my sewing table, and I use this pretty much every time I'm sewing. So definitely invest in a pack of these if you want to learn how to seam rip the best way. Next is my little thread snips. These are really great for snipping threads, as the name implies, but they're really particularly better than just normal scissors in this case, because when you're trying to snip threads, you need to get really close and precise to the fabric, and these are just a little bit too clunky, and just because the blades are so big, it's hard to get like close to the fabric and get like a precise cut. So these are kind of like embroidery scissors where they get a really, really fine and close exact snip, but without having the cumbersomeness of embroidery scissors. These are just really quick to just click and then it snips the thread. And they come in like a variety of versions, but I really like these metal ones because they're just really simple and probably the cheapest option. And I can also attach these to my sewing machine with a magnet and just kind of like throw it on my sewing machine and it sticks there. If you haven't seen my sewing machine tour, I recommend that. You can see how I attach these to my machine that way. But they also have like plastic versions, which have a little bit more of like a protective guard around the blade part, because this is really sharp and pokey and you can hurt yourself with them if you're not careful. But what I would use those plastic ones for is I used to tie like a ribbon around the little loop part and then wear the thread snips as a necklace, which is really handy if you don't have the little magnet attachment on your sewing machine, because you can just drop them and then they're hanging from your neck. And then when you're ready to pick them up, they're just right there and you don't have that problem of never knowing where your scissors are. So these are really great for that. These are just for thread, so they're not quite sharp enough to cut through fabric or anything, but really you don't need them to, because you should have regular scissors for that. And lastly, these are my see-through rulers. And these are really useful for pattern making, but also just sewing in general. Really helpful to be able to see what you're doing. And if you're trying to mark lines, like, you know, you want to mark something a ½ inch away or an inch away, then these really allow you to see things more clearly. So I know most people, when they first start out sewing, they have those like little metal rulers like this. And these are great for other purposes, but when you start marking lines and stuff like that, it's really helpful to have a clear see-through ruler instead. And I think I prefer the red color because it's easier to see the lines on most things that I'm working with, but my red is a little bit faded, so right now it's harder to see. But it's also good to just have two, because since they're see-through, I'm constantly losing them. They're kind of hard to see. They blend into the fabric really well, so having two doesn't hurt, and then you can kind of swap them depending on like what tone of the fabric you're working on. If it's more blue tone, you might want to use the red, and vice versa. But these are really essential type of ruler to have, even if you're not a pattern maker. They're just great for sewing in general. So that's it for my essential sewing tools guide. I really hope you found this useful, and do let me know if there's a specific tool that I missed that you find that you can't live without.